This poem is rather autobiographical, and you might say that it's sort of a collective biography of black young men who've grown up in the urban areas of America. Yes, yes, I rummaged the fragments of life, and knowing no quarter of peace, I ran to the edge of myself and screamed, vomiting shallow bubbles of hope down the highway of time.
This quilt represents 40 years of my life, just bookended by 40 years. 1958, the Marine Corps, the dress uniform, a semi-dress uniform, and the Battle of Work uniform here, one of them. So 1958, I went into Marine Corps a year after I finished high school. And as I said, 1998, my daughter gave me the Jackson State Dad emblem patch. And this covers, as I said, 40 years at least of my life. And Maya clearly dominates. I spent an evening with Maya. This was the Mountain City Medical. It was like the Doctors' Wives and Children organization, Mountain City Medical Association. And over here, and Still I Rise, Maya Angelou. And this is a special t-shirt that was put together to honor Maya for one of her events, and Still I Rise. This I said to the quilter, Edna Patterson Petty, when I gave it to her. Only thing I said is, this represents one of the key organizations in East St. Louis during the 60s, Black Culture Incorporated. I was born again in the 60s, from a Negro to a black person, to an African American. And it was as if it was my actual birth, or if when I was baptized. I mean, it was jarring and fraught with all kinds of beauty and terror, danger and success, joy. So I said this, and then I said, okay, these are some of the things that I wore. These are some of the things that were made for me by women in East St. Louis. I can just see them now. And then with the tank top, things that were in there and all this. So I said, that's what I want in the middle. That's what I want to dominate it, because that's when I became a new person altogether, Black Orpheus. And that's when I was born again. I've done some of everything, been everywhere. Workshop with the Reading and Writing Club in Minneapolis. And look at this, economic, quantitative principle, African-centered education, African history, economic empowerment. So it was a book reading club and a writers club, but the emphasis was on self-development, self-reliance, self-improvement, self-advancement, collective work and responsibility. The publication that I serve as associate editor for, the original Chicago Blues Annual. I read at the annual Chicago Blues Festival in Chicago, Mandela, one of my heroes. I remember I was in Detroit, visiting professor at Wayne State. My sister called me and said he just got out of jail in 1990. He just released. One God. The whole idea of one God, one person, Rastafari, Rastafarian, with the dominant colors being those of Ghana and the Rastafarian, movement in Jamaica and elsewhere. Its connection to Ethiopia, the Coptic Christians, and the pre-Christian cross that I wear all of the time. These are 6 hats. I'm known for my hats, made by students. It was a time for years, early on, I could almost predict that some student or students in my class were going to present me with a hat at the end of class. Africa, Africa's gifts to the world. All these, and me. I bought them for a bunch of children in a workshop, and I kept one for myself. Africa's gift to the world, representing most of the greatness. Malcolm X's name is first, and Anwar al-Sadat, First World Books, located in Atlanta. I invested in, at one point there were 5, a chain of 5. And it was interesting because I remember that, it's just hard to believe, but in one day, the owners made $18,000 one day during the National Black Arts Festival, a black bookstore, because there were so many, tens of thousands of people in Atlanta. Harlem on my mind, one of the dozens or so themes that you find on Harlem t-shirts. Of course, the outline of Africa comes from a big flag someone gave me, silk flag. Kwanzaa, and the first annual African Holocaust and Reparation Conference, Cleveland, Ohio, 1990. I went there for that. You can't see it, but bell bottoms. I saw the Temptations in an airport. We all know each other because the black entertainers moved across what was affectionately known as the Chitlin Circuit. And so that meant we had them in our communities. And one day I was in, my nephew was like 16. He had brought me to the airport, the person I said who I'm closest to. He took me to the airport in my Camaro, and he always says, who would give their Camaro to a 16-year-old and fly out of town for a month, But I mean, I had worked with, I trusted him, And so we were walking, and here come these guys, several of them tall with these bell bottoms and vests, and everybody was in awe in St. Louis Airport. And they stopped like this and said, "The poet!" And my nephew almost fainted. What am I looking at? So anyway, we wore the bell bottoms, and here's some remnants. East St. Louis is at the center of my heart. I was named Poet Laureate of East St. Louis in 1976. So this is the original plaque. First Poet Laureate of East St. Louis, Illinois, Eugene Redmond, 1976. It turns out that it's a record. Was announced at the inauguration of the first Poet Laureate of St. Louis a few months ago. The research was done. The first Poet Laureate of a city in Illinois, in the country. So that's another distinction for East St. Louis. Oh, my favorite eating place in Sacramento, the Ming Tree. That's where I used to meet Maya. She'd drive up and we'd meet at the Ming Tree. Maya Angelou, as I said earlier, and I say all over the world where I go to speak, said, asked me to be her brother forever in September of 1970. We'd seen each other and winked at each other in different parts of the country, right? Different festivals, rallies, conferences, confrontations of various sorts, movement. And how you doing? Hey, sister. And sometimes I would just say, I'd ask them, is she going to be there? If people didn't know her name, they said, are you going to the rally? And I would say, is she going to be there? And they said, who? I would say. And they said, oh, yeah, she'll be there. I said, well, I'm coming, Yeah, this is very something I'm very proud of. Now for, I would say about 10 years, this has been hanging from from the banister, actually, of a loft that I have. It's been on loan all over the country. Been on loan to the St. Louis History Museum, the Art Museum, to museums on the West Coast. And a few years ago, I stopped loaning it out. I said, moving it around like that, stop loaning it out. But I'm pleased. I've gotten requests from all over the world. I heard about it some kind of way to exhibit it. So I just put a stop to it.